Welcome to my CDISC 2021 European Interchange presentation. Yes, you can access the CDISC library from SAS. Two little disclaimers. In particular, with the second one, I want for my head to make clear that I'm not a professional developer. However, I wanted anyhow to challenge myself and see what are the benefits we can get out of the CDISC library, in particular as statistical programmers. This is the agenda with the introduction of the CDISC library and how we can access it. Then I will clarify a number of terms very often used today in some technical presentation from CDISC or from other CDISC technical guys. Then I will make some example of possible use of the CDISC library in SAS. So, what is the CDISC library? Well, the CDISC library is, in few words, essentially a metadata repository, the official CDISC metadata repository. From the library, we can extract the metadata in various formats, including our loved Excel. The CDISC library is a structure, meaning that its format is predictable, whatever export format you choose. The library is only available to the CDISC members or to open source developers. There are two ways of accessing or using the CDISC library: through a browser or through an API or an API. So if you are eligible to access the library, you can get an account from CDISC. I will do a demo in a minute of the so-called CDISC library data standard browser, but these are the CDISC standard that you can access as of today from either the browser or to the API. So basically all the foundational standards, including the CDISC control terminology. As I said, I have a short demo of the CDISC library I have recorded. Let's start with it. So when you access the data standard library, you have access to a dashboard where you can access a number of supportive resources. And then you can internally browse any version of any available standard. For example, for STM, you can access all available standard and implementation guidance, but also guidance such as the SDM guidance for medical devices. Once you click the standard you want to browse, for example, the latest STM implementation guidance, you will see that the STM classes from which you can access the applicable standard STM domain. For example, if we select in intervention class, we see all standard domain belonging to that class. If we select, for example, the exposure class, the exposure dataset, then still interactively, you can look at all details of each variable. And if a variable has also associated a standard CDISC code list, we can also look at the applicable code list standard terms. And from the same, in a minute, we can also export the full content of the selected standard into either Excel or CSV format. Should come in a minute. Here, for example, you can see the export in Excel, and as you can see, not only EX was exported by the entire implementation guidance. So as you can see from the browser, you cannot make partial export. So with the CDISC library data standard browser, it is not necessary anymore to look into the CDISC PDF document, except as of now for the assumption and the implementation example for which you still need to look into the implementation guidance, so to the PDF document. So these are slides I plan to skip. Okay. So the other method for accessing this library is through the API. But wait a minute, before jumping into the API topic, I need to clarify a couple of technical aspects and terms. The first time I heard the word JSON, I was not sure who the speaker was referring to, and I did not understand actually why we had also to do a rest just after 5 minutes from the start of the speech. However, I was also pleased to see the speaker wanted to raise the awareness of the APIs, of the API, suffering from the climate change. Okay, this last joke only works for Italian, as anyway, API or API in Italian means bees. So now you probably understood the joke. Anyhow, apart the joke, let me try to explain what those terms or technology are about. Also, the key in the fact they are mentioned in the CDISC library documentation, as you can see here from the screenshot. API stands for Application Programming Interfaces, and it allows you, your product or application or service, whatever, to talk to another product or service. API are often used to give people access to the data the owner of the data decide to make accessible, either freely or through a subscription, through a payment. For example, many financial websites give access to the user through API, from which the user can write its own program to, for example, access historical stocks data. Also, you are probably not aware, but you constantly deal with API when you access services available on website. The CDISC library browser makes use of the API in background, so the CDISC library API. This is for the user hidden, and as we saw before, when we browse the library through the data standard browser, a request is made to the CDISC library server. The server elaborates the request, and it returns to your internet browser the result in a readable format. But in reality, the format is something different. So it could be JSON, XML, CSV, but your browser, through a number of tools and instruments, interpret and make the output readable. Let me clarify what we mean by REST. REST is an acronym and not a verb, and it stands for Representational State Transfer. REST is the most, among the several API standards, is the most popular API standard for web application. It is made of two main, let me say, status or methods for accessing the application, the user request, for example, and the response with some data returned to the requester. The request is composed of four main elements: the address, or the so-called endpoint we saw before in the CDISC library definition, where the address makes use of the URL format, so the way we already used to write web pages address when we want to access an internet resource through our internet browser. Then an header, where we supply additional instruction to the server, to the API. A method, so the type of action we want the server to do for us. For the time being, let's just concentrate on the get method, that is the only available method with the CDISC library, meaning that we can only query the CDISC library. And the fourth element is actually optional, it's just applicable to some particular method. With the get method, you get a response or a file that can be based on different formats such as XML or JSON, but also you can also have CSV and Excel with the CDISC library API. And the file will contain an header and the data we requested. So in the case of the CDISC library, it could be the content of a recent CDISC control terminology. And then you the status, whatever the request, whether the request was correct, and the resource requested available on the server, or if the server was not available at all because, for example, it was down. The default format for the CDISC IP library, or the default format of the response, is JSON. Let's now familiarize a bit with the JSON format. JSON stands for JavaScript's object notation. If you are familiar with the XML format, I hope so, by the time being, JSON is comparable to XML. Among its characteristics, the size of the JSON file is more compressed compared to XML. For example, if we query the CDISC library to get the CDISC SDTM control terminology from last December, the JSON file will be around 9 mega, while the same in XML format is about 11 mega. I have a note from my friend Joseph telling me that apparently JSON is especially popular with younger people, while XML is more popular among the oldies. like him, actually using his words. Oh, finally, let us see how we can access the library from SAS. So SAS is our client from which we want to access the CDISC library. So in the CDISC library, the server. The SAS PROC HTTP, it is one of the way to query an API from SAS by sending a request to the API, in our case the CDISC library API, at the CDISC library address. We want to get an answer in JSON format, although I said it's the default. The request is then interpreted by the server, and a response is sent back to the SAS client in the format requested. But of course, we need to interpret the JSON format that is not native to SAS, and we can do that in SAS by using, for example, among the different techniques, the JSON libname engine. The query in my example returned the full list of products standards available in the CDISC library. We can see that one of the products is the Adam standard version 2.1, and by using its address with the SAS PROC HTTP, we can access and get the metadata from the standard. So in the model, we can say that through the PROC HTTP, we can make a request to the librarian, our CDISC librarian. The librarian makes the search, and it returns to us the requested resource, and through the proper SAS libname engine, in this case JSON, we can try to interpret the answer and make use of it. Let us decompose now the PROC HTTP syntax. So this part maybe will be more interesting for SAS programmers. So the main part is the full address of the resource we need to access. That is made of the CDISC library URL, followed by the endpoint, so the exact resource we need to get, the full set of endpoints, so requests we can make to the CDISC library. So the full set of endpoints, so the requests we can make to the CDISC library API is actually available at the following address, or it can be obtained with the MDR product endpoint we also saw in the earlier example. The response when returned will be saved in the file indicated in the out command. So in this example, the file will be simply named response.json and saved in my personal user area. The header will have the authentication key that I will have meanwhile obtained generated through my API developer CDISC library account. After a while, hopefully a little while, we get the response back from the CDISC library server. The first thing we need to check if our request was valid, and therefore if the CDISC library API was able to handle our requests. This can be checked with the automatic variable sys PROC HTTP status code, and for the CDISC library API, all responses when correctly executed return the code 200. So because I did a little tap in my request, SAS returned an error code, or better, the CDISC library returned an error code. And the status code of each CDISC library API can be actually consulted at the web page I earlier mentioned. Now, as previously said, if we get a successful response, our return file will have our request. In our case, the info we need from the CDISC standard, and in our case, a JSON file. So now we can use some, potentially use some parsing technique, such as parallel expression, to interpret the JSON file, or we can make use of the JSON SAS libname engine. What the engine does for us, is to try to guess or interpret the structure of your JSON file and organize the information to several data sets. And the number of or type of data sets depends on the type of request we made. As you can see, with the list number of data set returned by this other request, where we ask for STTM implementation guidance 3.3 metadata for TM domain. So depending on the type of request, we get a number of different data sets. So now that we know how to query the library from SAS, how much do you think it would be another value for the SAS programmer to query and get a use of this CDISC library API from SAS? Well, in my opinion, accessing the library from SAS can be very useful to regularly check with some sort of automatic scheduled SAS program if there is any update. For example, a new CDISC control terminology made available. Instead of maybe regularly checking the CDISC website for any update or setting a quarterly reminder, for example, for the CDISC control terminology. And based on the fact that there is an update, we can automatically update our local tables, so our SAS dataset, where our organization stores CDISC metadata used, for example, by our SAS programmer when they do write code to either migrate legacy dataset to STM or when they create add-on datasets. For this reason, because the way CD standards are handled nowadays by SAS programmer, there is not a big need of interactively querying the library from, for example, an STM mapping programs. I do also think when available, getting responses in Excel format rather than JSON or XML would be easier, as the structure of the Excel file is already in the tabular format, so very close on how SAS organize data. Although the JSON and XML formats have the advantage of having other metadata that you will not have available in the Excel, such as the link to earlier version. So, for example, if we look at the media type support matrix available on the CDISC wiki, for the main guidance standard, we can easily get the Excel file of, for example, one of the latest CDISC control terminology, or the last implementation guidance, STM implementation guidance version 3.3. While instead, if you want to get only a partial set of metadata, such as if you want only for the DM domain metadata, these are only available in either JSON or XML format. Reaching the end of my presentation with some final comments. Well, the main conclusion of my experience using the CDISC library is that while the browser is a useful tool to interactively query the standard, and not instead maybe querying or searching through Excel file, as a statistical programmer, the API offers probably limited advantages. In general, companies doing the STM mapping directly in SAS have metadata already organized somehow, for example, in SAS dataset. So for this type of application, probably the library is only needed to regularly check for any update and eventually automatically update sponsor or CRO metadata without going onto the CDISC website and check for any update, and then get the Excel version of the metadata and import it. There are a number of aspects that I think can be improved, such as repeating a mistake in the implementation guidance, or the ability of more granular queries. So, for example, extracting, if I want to extract all variable description of all demographic variable. While the ability of comparing between versions, for example, a diff file as per last CDISC webinar, it seems that this will be made soon available, but not yet available. Also, as per the risk, again, as per the recent CDISC webinar, there is also a plan to make available additional content, such as therapeutic area user guidance and conformance rules and many other things. So I suggest actually to you to watch the webinar if you miss it. I'll leave you with a number of good references I also used to study and prepare this topic. And if you have any question, do not hesitate to contact me.